Good morning and welcome to the show. This is Suzi Marsh from Behavioral Solutions with Choosing Life, Addictions, Mental Health, and Recovery, the show dedicated to your emotional, mental, and spiritual healing and rejuvenation. This show is a public affairs presentation from B98.5 FM. So excited about our show today because live in my studio is Wayne Dyer, and almost everyone knows who Wayne is. I read his first book, or the first book that got famous, in I think 1976 or 1977, at a time when I could only identify everyone else in the book except for me, and before my own journey began. But I'm so excited because I've heard of you ever since then, and we just spoke of you 2 weeks ago on our show when we talked about your other book, Real Magic, and we talked about teaching people how to get out of the prison of their own minds. So Wayne Dyer is here with us, and he needs no introduction, but just in case you've been under a rock, he's one of the most popular best-selling authors and lecturers on motivational topics. He has been credited with beginning the self-development movement. And he spent the first 10 years of his life in an orphanage. He'll tell you a little bit about that himself. His most famous book was Your Erroneous Zones, published in '76, and many other books, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with Manifest Your Destiny. His latest book that we'll be talking a lot about today is called Wisdom of the Ages. That's Dr. Wayne Dyer with Wisdom of the Ages. And by the time this show has aired, you'll have unfortunately missed his public TV special, but luckily for me, he's here in Atlanta. So Dr. Dyer is the best-selling author of 13 books and 3 textbooks. He has a doctorate in counseling psychology, and as you guys already know, he lectures across the country to groups numbering in the thousands and appears regularly on radio and television, and he now lives with his family in southern Florida. And again, I'm so excited. I hope I don't act goofy today.
That's all right. Goofy is good. I like goofy.
Well, I love it when I get to interview authors that I've heard of for years and really admire, so I'm really glad you're here. And I know, and here these people come in on these book tours, you guys, they just work them to death. They're so tired, so we'll be gentle on them today. I would love it if you would tell a little bit of your personal history. When people tune into my show, they know that I'm a recovering alcoholic, and they hear my story all the time every week. They're sick of it. But if you would tell anything about your history, as I was reading a little bit in the biography about your childhood, I think that would really help people who, when they're fans, they want to know your whole life.
Right.
So,
well, my childhood was exactly what it was supposed to be, as was everybody else's out there that's listening. A lot of people portray it as difficult and as a struggle and as hard times and so on. But when you're 6 years old and you wake up and you're living in an orphanage, you don't say, why did this happen to me? Poor me. I don't belong here. Nobody else is here. You get up and you deal with your life and you just enjoy your life. And then you turn 40 in a few weeks. And you're an addict. And your relationships are all falling apart. And you're broke. And you've lost your job. And lots of things are happening in your life. And people say, well, why is all of this happening to you? How come your life is such a mess? And very often you'll say, well, what do you expect from me? I was an orphan, And you look back into your past and you come up with all of these excuses for why things aren't the way they
so you did
would
do that?
like them to be.
You did blame things on your past?
I didn't, but a lot of people do. I've always felt that my experiences in my life were exactly what I needed to go through in order to get to the next place. And truly, while I was going through them, I didn't think that it was any particular hardship because it's all I knew. I mean, I just got back from Africa. I spent 11 days over there, and I saw children playing in the jungle. We were out in sort of like a semi safari kind of situation, and I saw children walking to school and coming home with big plastic bottles of containing water, where they would walk to get the water because there's no running water in their villages and so on. And they were smiling and laughing and goofing off and doing the same thing that kids do here. I mean, they weren't saying, "Isn't this terrible? We've got to go get our own water. We should have running water. Why isn't that happening?" They were just dealing with their environment and what their circumstances were. And now when they get older, they may, want to have some excuses for what it is. Castaneda once said that if you don't have a story, you don't have to live up to it. And most people have a story. He also said that one day, he said, I finally realized that I no longer needed a personal history. And just like drinking, he said, I gave it up. And he said that and only that has made all the difference. So I never really think much about my personal history. I think that I've been teaching self-reliance on this planet since I showed up here. And it's as if I had a conversation with God prior to getting here, saying, what do you want to do while you're here? And I said, well, I'm going to teach self-reliance. And he said, well, then you better get your little rear end into an orphanage and learn how to rely on yourself. And once you do, you'll know it, and you won't be able to have anyone dissuade you from it. And I look upon all of my experiences in my life exactly like that. That I am the product of the choices I've made, and I'm the product of the experiences that I needed to go through. And every fall of our life, it tells us in the Kabbalah, every fall of our life provides us with the energy to propel ourselves to a higher place in our lives. Virtually every spiritual advance that you make in your life is preceded by a fall of one kind or another. Sometimes it's an accident, sometimes it's a breakup, sometimes it's some kind of illness, sometimes it's a fire, whatever it might be, you're losing a job. But these kinds of experiences that we have give us the energy to get to a higher place, and we need them. When someone tells me I've just been fired and just lost my job, I always say congratulations. You know.
Well, it only took me 20 years of therapy and self-help to get to where you are.
Right.
He woke up being that way. So you never really, sounds like, blamed your past or felt sorry for yourself or dealt with self-pity, and I think that's what you're describing is a lot of the principles that we teach people in alcoholism treatment and therapy and those kinds of things. So it's good to hear you saying some of that. And also you're reminding me of what Betty Ed.D. and a lot of other masters of our current time talk about, which is a little bit different than your book Wisdom of the Ages, where you talk about eternal truths written by people that you really respect and masters and teachers. So
well, I think if we want to grow, the thing to do is to look at the highest functioning people among us, rather than to look at the lowest functioning people and put labels on them and say this is where humanity is headed.
That's great.
You know, instead we ought to say, and that's what Maslow said. He said, let's look at he called them self-actualizers. Let's look at these highly functioning people. I was always attracted to that idea. And what are they like? How do people who operate at the very highest levels of human awareness, what are they like? What kind of things, how do they think? What is their daily life like? And so when I wrote Wisdom of the Ages, I took 60 of the most profound and important teachers in my life, and 60 of the ideas that I think constitute enlightenment, and I wrote a book called Wisdom of the Ages, and I subtitled it now, 60 Days to Enlightenment. So it's 60 essays based upon 60 of the most important teachers, and how to apply this each and every day in your life. And by the way, most of these people were not conformists. They were not people who, most of them were troublemakers. Society has a tendency to honor its living conformists and its dead troublemakers.
Right, that's exactly
right, it is. And they were people who were independent of the good opinion of other people. They had great passion for life. They resisted enculturation. They didn't fit in. They were thought to be insane most of the time.
Yeah, hey, that could be me when I'm dead.
Right. Some were thought to be, some were in prison. Thoreau was put in prison. Whitman was thought of as a crazy person, as was Blake. Cicero was executed for his ideas. Jesus, of course, was crucified for his ideas. And most of them, in one way or another, were vilified. Emerson was thought of as a fool throughout most of his adult life. It was only after he was gone that we revered him, and so on.
That's great. And you see yourself as a nonconformist, right?
Well, I don't really do it deliberately. I don't try to, because I think if you're deliberately trying to be a nonconformist, that's a form of conforming. It's a form of letting other people's behavior and conduct and reactions to you control you.
That's great.
So you see how everybody else is behaving, you say, well, I'm going to be just the opposite. Well, how everybody's reacting then is what's controlling you.
Exactly.
I have a tendency to just do what makes sense to me. I dress the way I want. I speak the way I want. I don't get concerned with whether or not it's going to be approved of or whether other people are going to like it or so on. I've always lived my life from sort of an inner conviction that as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, then anything that I do is absolutely fine.
What are some of the things that happened to you that brought you to that in your young adulthood, like in your 20s? Did you have experiences with masters like therapists or motivational speakers, people that you looked up to, or just through your own experience with reading some of the masters that you talk about in Wisdom of the Ages?
Well, I was never in therapy, and I didn't really do a whole lot of self-reflection, but I've always been a writer. And I think we think too much, and we analyze everything, and we try to get it all, and it keeps us from living and enjoying every moment. That's why I believe so strongly in meditation, the ability to go within and get quiet and stop the thinking process. As a young man, I think I learned how to rely upon myself when I was very, very young. And I was the richest kid in the orphanage. I always had it like figured out. And most of the people that were there who felt sorry for themselves, that feeling of self-pity is what kept them from being able to resolve their problems. Einstein once said that you can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it. So,
oh, that's great.
yeah, if you've got any problems at all, you got to change your mind. I mean, you don't. If you got lung cancer, you know what caused it, a certain kind of mindset called smoking. Or if you've got alcoholism, you know what. So you don't solve the problem of drinking with the same mind that created it. You have to create a new mind that says drinking is no longer the way that I am going to fulfill myself in my life. And so it's about changing your mind. And when I was a little boy, I used to go out and cut people's grass before they would ask me. And I was to go out and shovel their snow. And early in the morning, at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, I would sleep with the snow shovel so that nobody else would get it. And I'd just go out, and I wouldn't ask people if they wanted their snow shoveled because there's a chance of rejection. I'd just go out and shovel it. I didn't have anything else to do anyway. And then I would go around and knock on their doors when they would wake up and say, I shoveled your snow for you. And they would always give me 10 cents or something for doing that. And I would come back, and all of the kids were always complaining about not having any money because there was no money. I always had money, and I would lend them money, and I learned about interest rates, you know. I'll lend you a dime if you pay me back 15 cents in 2 weeks or whatever. And today I'm 59 years old. I've never had a car payment in my life. I don't have house payments. I've had one or two, and that was it. I never looked at other people's lives or gardens and decided that I was being shortchanged because I wasn't getting what they were getting. If I liked something and wanted something, I just put it away for it, and I saved for it, and then I created it and got it. That's just been my style.
You manifested
and I showed
it.
up with that in my life. I don't know why I have that. It's like we, as therapists, very often in psychology, people try to compartmentalize and figure out, you know, if you're born into a family of alcoholics, then you're very likely to become an alcoholic. But if you take 100 kids that were born into a family of alcoholics, 50 of them are going to become alcoholics and emulate it, and there's another 50 who are going to say, Jesus, I saw that all my life, and I don't want any part of that. There's no, and I won't touch it. I just don't want to be, involved in that in my life.
Right.
You take kids from that are born into families that are very affluent, and some of them will become very spoiled, and they won't do anything in their life because they've had everything handed to them, and others of them become philanthropists, and they serve other people. They're altruists their whole life. Some kids who are born into horrible circumstances turn out to be horrible, and end up in jail, and some of them turn out to be presidents and statesmen and so on. You know what my personal view of it all is, Susie? I think we all show up here with what we're supposed to do. I've got 8 children. I've been there for the birth of 7 of them. Mm. And I've watched them come into the world, and there's some that come in smiling and laughing and giddy and happy, and 18 years later, I still come home and they're still smiling and they're laughing and giddy, and the ones that are surly and angry and so on, I come home and 15 years later, they're still angry and surly, and it's like, it's like they come in with personality. Some of them sleep right through the night after you bring them home from the hospital,
right.
And some don't go to sleep for 3 weeks,
right.
Or 3 years rather. And I think that one of the essays I wrote in Wisdom of the Ages was from Khalil Gibran, and he said, when you were born, he said, your work is placed in your heart. Your work is placed in your heart. And the problem is, and of the people that I selected to highlight and to write these essays on these ideas, not one of these 60 people in here died with their music still in them, you see. Mm. And that's probably the biggest lesson of their lives that I think all of us could learn.
They sang it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I couldn't sleep last night. The grandbaby cried for hours. So
you have a grandbaby?
Yes.
My goodness, what were you, 3? When you don't look like you're old enough to
even
have children, let alone grandchildren.
Well, you barely look 40. By the way, I wanted to say when we took a break that your pictures do not show your vibrant life and your spirit. Every picture I've seen of you does not look like you sitting here. Oh, not at all. Huh. It's like let me have the photographer because they don't do you justice. Anyway, I just want you to know that his life is not captured in these photographs of him. But so I was looking through your book because I have so many books to read for the radio show and for my job. So I was looking through your book last night about 3 o'clock in the morning and thinking about something that intimidates me. It's always related to money for me. And I was reading about fear. and about not wanting to die with anything that makes me think, okay, I didn't do that because I was afraid. And really, it wasn't the grandbaby that kept me up. It was the fact that I had been trying not to think about this issue.
Right.
And that was what that was my nature. That is not my nature to ignore it or deny it. And I was trying to just sleep it away. And as a consequence, I had an incredible morning, had a wonderful confrontation with something that really intimidated me and felt incredible.
Right.
So it was really exciting. And I love what you said, and what I can't remember which passage it was that was talking about fear and not letting yourself die with your music.
It was Alfred Lord Tennyson, and he had a wonderful line at the end of one of his poems about risk-taking and not being afraid. And he said, "'Tis far better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all."
Exactly.
And it's like it's one of the most quoted poems and lines in all of poetry. And I wrote an essay about that idea of fear, and it reminds me.
That's what I was reading.
Yeah, I went back to my high school reunion, 30-year high school reunion a few years back, and there was a girl there. Her name was Linda Carter. And when I was in high school, she was like the knockout girl in the class. I mean, she was just stunning, all right? And I always wanted to ask her out. And I would love to have gone out with her. And I used to mull over in my mind, geez, I wonder what if she, but there was this thing that stopped me. I was 17 years old, and I stopped myself because I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid that she might say no, and then I'd have to deal with the fact that I really wasn't good enough for her, or whatever it was. I don't know what was going on then. So I never did, and meantime she went out with other people, and so we meet like 30 years later, now she's close to 50, and she's still stunning, all right? So I was dancing with her at the reunion, and I said to her, you know something, I just got to share this with you. I always wanted to go out with you when I was in high school. I would have given anything to just have a date with you. And she said, I was always attracted to you. I always say, I wonder why Wayne never asked me out, because you always looked like you wanted to. And I went, oh my God, such a great lesson. You never regret what you do. You only regret what you don't do.
That was the line. That was the line. You
and
only regret what you don't do.
So I mean, all I would have known, it's like even when you're out and you're dating and you're in the car in the drive-in and you want to get a kiss or a feel or whatever, it's like the worst that can happen is, but you might get the kiss or you might get the feel, but you'll never know if you didn't make the effort, if you didn't try.
That's
so
great.
I've learned that lesson in my life. It's
so
better to have loved and lost
it's
than
so
never
true.
to have loved at all.
And someone else was talking about, if I haven't felt fear in a few weeks or a few months, sometimes I let it go for months, and I know there's an edge I'm not pushing. And I was thinking, I've been really comfortable for a while. So
well, I don't know. There's in the Course in Miracles, they said that there's really only two emotions. And it really helped me as a therapist years ago. First, he said, the Course says that there's two emotions, fear and love. And in the New Testament it says that perfect love casteth out all fear. So that if you're living in a state of fear of any kind, and it's very often not a fear for physical danger, it's a fear of rejection, it's a fear of failing, sometimes it's a fear of success, it's a fear that somebody else might not approve of you, or you might not get what you want, or whatever. But the solution to things of fear is to create a state of perfect love within yourself, wherein you find yourself connected to God or connected to Spirit, and you bring that spiritual sort of essence, if you will, to the things that we call disorder, disharmony, disease. Goldsmith says that these are illusions. These are just simply illusions. That disease and disharmony and disorder they're mistakes. They're mistakes of the intellect. Like in mathematics, if you have an equation, 2 plus 2 is 4. It's truth. It's truth. It's got substance. It always has and always will. Every time you say 2 plus 2, it'll come out 4. Now if someone comes up to you and says, no, 2 plus 2 is 7. You say, no, that's an error. Well, how do you correct that error? How do you get rid of that? How do you fix that? You correct it and it goes away. So what you do is you bring truth to it and the error disappears. Same thing is true of disorder, disharmony, even disease. It's nothing iniquitous can be of God, and everything is of God. There's no place that God is not. So if there's no place that God is not and everything is of God, everything that is not good can't exist.
And I can't remember if it was Confucius, no, it wasn't him, but in one of the chapters in your book you talked about, maybe it was a Buddhist master said to a student, or someone said, Buddha. I'll give you an apple if you can tell me where God...
Right. I'll give you an orange. It was a story of a little boy who in the 7th century And he was known as an avatar. He was known as a god walking among us, and everywhere he would go, lights would emanate from his body. He had shown up without the benefit of an ego. He didn't have an ego. He was operating at this, what we call unity consciousness, or God consciousness. And everybody in the village knew that. And one of the elders came up to the little boy and knew that he was talking to God in a human form, and he said, I'll give you an orange if you can tell me where God is. And the little boy responded without even hesitating. He said, I'll give you 2 oranges if you can tell me where God isn't.
That's wonderful.
Well, it's the basis, Susie, for manifesting. If there's no place that God is not, if it is this universal, mean one, universal intelligence or source or energy is everywhere at once, that means that it must be in you. If there's no place that it's not, it must be in you. And if it's also no place that it's not, it must be in everything that you would like to attract into your life. So in some invisible way, through this process that we call the source or God, you're already connected to everything that you perceive to be missing from your life. So manifesting is nothing more than realigning your inner intention with what it is you'd like to attract in your life. You begin to see yourself as connected to it rather than separate from it, and lo and behold, it begins to show up in your life. See yourself as separate from it, and it will always stay separate from you. It's just a question of how you process the world.
It's so amazing. It's so true, and it's kind of a silly example of what I was working on last night, but it was exactly me refusing to believe in faith and refusing to believe in myself, and it was the same issue over and over for me with money. And
what is the issue with money? It's just
I get intimidated when I'm pressured, and anyway, it's you don't want to hear the whole story.
Yeah, I do.
You don't?
Because I have issues about my
cosmetic surgery. It's about being pressured to have a great big huge policy for cosmetic surgery. But no, I'm kidding. It's not that bad, but close. But and just being pressured and having a hard time saying no. And finally, when I worked on it, and that's why I'm saying it's so trivial. I mean, I've worked on things like not drinking before, so this is so trivial compared to that. But still,
but nothing is trivial. If you feel it, it's real.
And at my age, at 42, I'm thinking, I'm so tired of being intimidated about money. This is silly. So, and I knew that's why I wasn't sleeping, because this is such a minor issue. And I'm like, this is, I have to get rid of this.
Well, it's interesting because I have that issue. I grew up in an orphanage, and I have 8 children who live in great affluence, and it's like I can take a shower for 2 months on the soap that my kids discard as a finished bar of soap. I can brush my teeth for 6 months on the tubes of toothpaste that they throw away when they think that it's empty. I mean, I go around and I literally pick those things up, and I take them back into my bathroom, and I use the toothpaste, and I take the slivers of soap, which aren't slivers but half bars, and I just pick, because I can't wait. So I mean, I have an issue like that as well. But I have found that if I stop thinking about money, that the issue goes away, because most people who think about money think about almost nothing else. That's almost what their mind is on all the time. And so I
tend to give mine away.
Yeah, I do that too. I give it to my kids and talk about an issue, because I know that there's a part of me that realizes that I created affluence in my life because nobody ever handed me anything. And so now here I am handing things to my kids and wondering why they don't have the same values.
Exactly.
I think it's a conflict that they were talking about 6,000 years ago.
Right.
I have 2 sheep and they don't have any sheep, and I got a robe over here and they don't. Whatever. I think it's a conflict of the generations.
You have such a great story. Well, I've opened your book, and since you also meditate and are probably into just intuition, to physical perfection, and there's a quote by Walt Whitman. So maybe we should end the first half of the show, which we have about a minute and a half, with this chapter.
Well, Whitman, said to me, I think, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he said to me, every cubic inch of space is a miracle. And go ahead, read it exactly.
To me, every cubic inch of space is a miracle. Welcome is every organ and attitude of me. Not an inch, not a particle of an inch is vile.
Yes, and that's, I think, a really essential spiritual message, that everything that is good is of God, and there's nothing that God created everything, so that everything that God created has to be good. So that the only thing that isn't good is what we create with our mind, which is an attitude and a belief system that says it's not good, it's vile, it's something wrong with it. And all we have to do to correct that is to bring God to it, bring spirit to it, unplug from the material world,
Right.
plug into the world of spirit.
Right, exactly. And the truth is, if I am honest about myself, it was the being bullied and pressured that was difficult for me,
Right.
and not
Yeah.
really the money.
Yeah.
It was being bullied. So we're going to end the first half of our show. I hope you stay tuned. We're talking with Dr. Wayne Dyer, and this is Suzi Marsh. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Choosing Life, Addictions, Mental Health, and Recovery. And in the studio, in my studio, is Dr. Wayne Dyer. I'm so excited. And we're talking about his new book, Wisdom of the Ages. And this is a really interesting book, the way he's written it. Of course, when he had a little rule in here about read one section a day, of course, I had to cheat and read about 6 or 7. And it's a great program for really understanding morals, values that you want to incorporate, more about spiritual wisdom than I hate to say morals, it sounds so moralistic, but incorporating spiritual values, looking at fear, looking at limitations in your ego and in your mind that you would want to change, and wonderful essays, poetry. And I've never really been into poetry very much, but some beautiful classic literature and classic essays and poetry. So welcome back.
It's interesting, Susie, that this, because a lot of times people ask me, why did you write this book? And I was a school teacher for many years and a college professor, and I've been teaching as long as I've been alive. And oftentimes when I would say something in classroom or whatever, my students would come back and say, what does what somebody said 1,000 years ago have to do with me? And I would try to tell them that just because that person's body isn't here, it doesn't mean their spirit isn't, and that you're any more than because your body is here, that's all you are. There's something inside of you that's looking out, that's invisible, that is eternal. And if that force is the same force that moves a thought across your mind, moves the stars across the sky, it also did it for people in the year 1000 and 5,000 years ago. And in a sense, we're spiritually, we're connected to everyone. One of the great lines from this that I wrote an essay about in here was from Orrin Lyons, who was a Native American poet. And he said, when we walk upon Mother Earth, we always plant our feet very carefully, because we know the faces of our future generations are looking up at us from beneath the ground, and we never forget them. And he called that a sacred hoop, and that there's like this sacred connection to everyone. I mean, when I think about when I was walking through the Parthenon in Greece and realizing that Socrates was breathing the same air that I breathed and looking at the same moon that I looked at night and having his body warmed by the very same sun that warmed my body. Or when I would be in Egypt and I would think about those pharaohs and the people who built the pyramids and so on, thinking, they had the same feelings that I did, and they were walking on this very earth that I'm walking on now. And when you let go of the world of form and begin to see yourself not as a human being having a spiritual experience, but as a spiritual being. Yeah, having a human experience. When you see that, when you begin to know that, then you know that you're connected in spirit to everything and everyone that ever was. And I wanted this book to reflect that not only is this ancient wisdom powerful and important, but it's something that you can apply every day in your life. That's why at the end of each chapter, I have put 4 or 5 specific suggestions. Take this information, take today, Monday, Tuesday, whatever day it is, and see if you can apply it today. Do it again for 60 days. And practice meditation as well in those 60 days. And you will begin to live at the same level of consciousness that all of these great teachers were living at. And you'll find yourself. I tell people, think of yourself as a saint. Think of yourself. Don't think of yourself in less than saintly terms. And don't be afraid of your own divinity, which most people are.
Afraid of their own power. I can understand and relate. I was reading last night about St. Francis of Assisi or Assisi, and
right.
I've always loved animals, especially dogs, and recently interviewed an animal psychic. It was great. But talk to us about the writings you have in here about St. Francis, and you just really are passionate about him.
I'm very passionate about him. I could talk for hours about St. Francis. I've been to the Portiuncula in Assisi where he did all of his healing. I sat there in the very same chapel where he sat. I walked in the same hills and walked through the same streets, which are exactly as they were in the 13th century when he was here. It's interesting about animals and so on. There's one of the great teachers whoever walked on this planet was a man named Patanjali in the 4th century before Christ. And Patanjali said this when he wrote the original Yoga Sutras, like the information to teach us how to reach higher and higher levels, to do things like heal, to do things like levitate, to be able to be in more than one place at the same time. These magical kinds of formulas that and I practiced some of them and had just wonderful and bizarre experiences. And he said that when a person becomes steadfast in their abstention from harming others, that is, having thoughts of harming others, when you become steadfast in your abstention from harming others, thinking that all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in your presence. Okay? And he said, when you are steadfast in your abstention from what he called ignorance, which is not ignorance in terms of not knowing something, being ill-informed, but ignorance he defined as false identification, that is, identifying yourself with your body rather than your soul. So he said there's two things. You have to become steadfast in your abstention from harming others and from identifying yourself as a body with a soul. Then all living creatures will cease to feel enmity, and not only will they cease to feel enmity, but you'll begin to be able to know the inner nature of animals, plants, and so on. And when you know the inner nature of plants and animals and so on, when you are around them, they will feel at one with you. Now, this is who St. Francis was. St. Francis was the first person to experience the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, the bleeding of the hands and the feet and so on. And he did it every day. I mean, he was such passionate. I think the finest movie ever made, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's called Brother, Son, Sister, Moon.
No, but when I read that,
yeah, you can rent it at
Blockbuster,
and it's just a really powerful. It's Franco Zeffirelli, 1975. It's a movie that I get excited just thinking about seeing it. I watch it about once a month. My wife and I will sit down and watch it because we were in Assisi together. We went to the place where St. Francis. And St. Francis's prayer, I never really truly understood. I had it. Someone had sent it to me in calligraphy, and I had it framed, and I put it in the hallway where my daughters, I have 6 daughters and 2 sons, and when they would walk down the hallway where their bedroom is, I just felt if they walked past it enough in their lifetime that by osmosis some of this would get into them.
Right.
But the prayer of St. Francis is probably the most profound message of healing and the most profound message of spiritual consciousness. I'm working on a book now called There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. And what I've discovered is that what St. Francis said is, where there is injury, let me bring pardon, or something to that effect.
Right,
where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is anger, let me send love, and so on. And so what he was saying is what I was saying earlier, that all of these things like anger, hatred, bitterness, tension, disease, disharmony, discord, all of these things are errors because they're not of God. Okay? So they're only creations in our mind, right? And that therefore they're illusions. They don't really exist. We just believe in them, and so we act on them. And the way that we correct errors is by bringing truth to them, or bringing love to them, or bringing kindness to them, or whatever. And so St. Francis was just simply saying, wherever I see anything that is out of balance, let me bring balance to it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of doing that, you eliminate it. So if you've got a problem with somebody, and you're plugged into the problem and how angry you are and how hurt you are and how they shouldn't be doing that, if you can unplug yourself from the world of the physical, the material, and just plug yourself, if you will, into another socket, the socket of God. Just plug yourself into God.
Exactly.
St. Francis is saying all of that will be eliminated. It's a wonderful concept.
And
beautiful prayer.
I remember memorizing that prayer. Of course, it's not still in my memory, but years ago when I first stopped drinking and drugging, and it was really a comfort to me. And one of the meditations that I did last night when I was wide awake was to physically imagine this string between me and this experience of being bullied, and that it got severed by the hands of Christ, and then those strings went up to Christ instead of from me to this experience. And
it's taming the ego. I was in South Africa just last week, and the woman interviewing me there asked me what was my greatest achievement of my life. And I sat there and I was going through, in my ego, I was going through all of the great accomplishments that I had and how wonderful I am, and all the books I'd written and all of the appearances I've made and all the money I've made and all of the stuff I've been able, and my wife and my children. And every time I'd go to answer, I'd say, no, but that isn't really the greatest achievement of my life. And finally it hit me. The greatest achievement of my life I have been able, over the past 25 or 30 years or so, to tame my ego, which is a huge, huge undertaking. Because true nobility is not about being better than somebody else. It's about being better than you used to be.
Right.
And I don't think I'm better than anybody else listening. But I know that I'm better than I used to be in every area of my life.
That is
I know
great.
that I am. Yeah.
Great.
And that's like today, I'm a camel, like you are. A camel is an animal who starts out every day on his knees, and he ends up every day on his knees, and he can go 24 hours without a drink.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
That's a camel, and that's what I am. And there was a time when I wasn't as well. And
Right.
I let go and let God and went into that surrender modality, where I realized that who I am is not what I have, who I am is not what I do, who I am is not what my reputation is. Who I am is the beloved, connected always to the Father, connected always to God. And as long as I know that, then I don't ever have to worry about going back to areas of my life that are, self-defeating.
Right.
Because addiction has often been described as never getting enough of what you despise.
And one of the things that I really loved early on was being taught that addiction, alcohol, or a drug had become my God. I mean, I couldn't understand what these people were teaching me in the beginning, but eventually it was like, that was my God. I violated any of my ideas or thoughts or values or morals. It was God.
Well, every stupid thing I ever did in my life was done under the influence of drinking. Every stupid thing. And almost everybody out there can say the same thing.
Well, you may not be able to answer this because you may say, I have none, but what's your biggest regret then?
Well, I regret that I didn't ask Linda Carter to go out with me when I was in high school. I could have got a feel anyway. I have no regrets. I really don't have any
I knew you were going to
regrets.
say that.
I don't. I look back on my life and I say, well, I wasn't ready to ask Linda out. And Linda is just a metaphor for all of the things that I wasn't ready for in my life. And I have no regrets about the mistakes that I've made. And, I've been through divorce. I know the struggle of that. I've played the game of drinking and playing around with drugs and all of that, and I don't have any regrets about that, because you can't advance to the next level in your life unless you have those falls. You have to bless all of them.
Exactly.
And you have to have forgiveness in your heart, not only for all of the other people out there, but for yourself as well. And Mark Twain said that forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it.
That is so
Isn't
beautiful.
that beautiful? Yeah, he could write. He could say things so well.
Oh, that is really gorgeous.
And so you just, people, you've crushed yourself. You've done things, and you remind yourself that I needed to go through that. I mean, one of the things I really know is that people can change, and there's a lot of people out there who believe that you can't change. I had a letter one time from a woman who was a crack cocaine prostitute, waking up every day in her own vomit and urine, okay? I mean, she was really gone, living on the streets.
Right.
And she went into a drugstore one morning looking for something to make a pipe out of for her crack, because her crack pipe broke, all right?
Correct.
Yeah. And she there was a one of those spindles with tapes on it. And there was a tape on there that I had recorded in the 1970s called How to Be a No Limit Person. And she stole it. Okay? She just put it in her purse. All right? She went home and she listened to that tape. And that, and it wasn't me, it was just, this was the synchronicity of what this was.
Exactly.
That was what it was that she needed. I mean, I remember one woman telling me one time, she said, I said, how did you lose weight? Because I saw a picture of her, and she was like 150 pounds less than she was 10 years ago. She said, my little girl came home one day, and she brought a girlfriend with her. And her girlfriend said, I didn't know your mommy was fat. She said, that was it. That was it.
That was it.
When the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Exactly.
Now, it might appear as a tape in a grocery store,
that
you have stolen, and it might appear as a little child saying those words or whatever. Right. But if you have a readiness, then you'll implement it. Well, this woman today, this former crack cocaine prostitute who was really down as low as you can get in the gutter, is today the mother of 3 children that she has adopted. She is president of her own company. I hear from her all the time. I did a whole show on Sally Jesse Raphael with her just because I wanted people to know anybody can change at any time in their life. All you have to do is be ready. And if you're ready, whatever you need will show up. The teachers will show up, the books will show up, the right people will show up, the tape will show up, whatever, you know.
I had, again, it's a silly example, but because of the fear that I had, when I sat down this morning and opened up the phone book, all of a sudden there was a number to call. I called it, had all these questions answered that I couldn't get answered through this other person, and it made everything so clear. And it was because I kept thinking about it. I'm not going to be limited by my fear. I mean, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to.
I had the biggest fear when I was in high school. Now, this is the kind of person you talk about. What I have been in my life, and I don't know many people who do the things that I do, who act that way. I was so terrified of getting up in front of a group and speaking, and giving an oral book report in front of Mrs. Thompson's 9th grade English class that I had to do an oral report, that I just absolutely made myself sick.
Right.
I would lay in bed at night and I would sweat, and I would just pray that she would have a mild heart attack. You know, just mild. I didn't want her to die. I just didn't want her to show up so that she would call on me.
Exactly.
And I would put myself through this every single time. It was so, and I remember laying on, I can tell you exactly where it was, what street I was on, what my bed sheets looked like, what the whole thing. And I remember having this epiphany, this insight, which was I am being controlled by this fear. This fear has got a hold of me,
exactly.
and I am never, ever going to escape from it unless I face it.
It's the only way.
So I signed up the next semester for public speaking, the thing that scared the hell out of me. I mean, I was just terrified of this. I just took it, and it turns out that I did that better than anything I've ever done.
Well, Dr. Dyer, does that mean I need to go take accounting?
Yes. No, you face the fear. You just face it. You know.
I know.
Susan Jeffers has a book called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway," or something to that effect.
Right.
You know? So what you do is you feel it, you express it, you experience it, and then you face it, and you turn around. And I tell people who have bad dreams, you do the same thing. Whatever is chasing you in your dream, just stop and turn around and say, "What do you want?" You know.
Right. And it works.
It does. Yeah.
It does. Well, what about mercy? Because we're coming closer to the end of the show. You have a chapter here called Mercy, and I just love the idea of mercy.
I've got to read that.
There's a quote from William Shakespeare that I'll read to you while you're looking it up. It's on page 65 in my book.
I'll read that sonnet. It's the greatest sonnet ever written.
Oh, that's wonderful. From the Merchant of Venice. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath it. Is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power doth then show likest God's, when mercy seasons justice.
I get goose flesh when I think about that, and what a beautiful command of the language he had. From the Merchant of Venice. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath, and it's twice blessed, 2 times. It blesses him that gives and him that takes, and 'tis mightiest in the mighty. It becomes the throne monarch better than his crown. It's a better quality to have than your crown, which is the scepter shows the force of temporal power. But the attribute of awe and majesty is this mercy, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above that way. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And it's like mercy must season justice, when mercy seasons justice. And mercy is not forgetting. It's no longer living with hatred and bitterness and tension and fear and anxiety and so on in your heart. It's letting go of it. It's just letting go of it, and finding in some place inside of you the ability to say, I no longer am going to send you hatred. It was the turning point in my life when I went to my father's grave, who walked out on us and abandoned all of us. Never made a phone call. Never looked back. Never saw my father. Never met the man. He spent some time in prison, and then he left, and I ended up at his grave in 1974 10 years after he was dead, when I found out that he was dead. And I went to his grave in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I stood there. And I said, from this moment on, I was there for 3 hours crying and sobbing, because I always had dreamed about him, and I was always angry at him, and I always hated him, and I used to wake up with sweat and so on. And I said, from this moment on, I send you love. And my whole life turned around after that when I sent mercy, where, it is twice blessed. Blessed is him that gives and him that receives. I wrote Erroneous Zones in 14 days. Right after that, immediately after that. I got out of a relationship which was very stultifying. My writing changed. I stopped drinking. I lost weight. I was about 30 pounds overweight. I took care of that. I began running, and I began like a 25-year streak of running every single day.
I know, I read that.
Erroneous Zones today has close to 50 million copies around the world in 47 languages. My whole life just changed. My soulmate, my wife, came into my the 7 children that came through us. We're all waiting for me to get rid of that hatred.
Isn't that great?
The Chinese proverb, I love it. It says, if you're going to pursue revenge, you'd better dig 2 graves.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing how self-hatred, when you think you're hating the predator or the person that hurts you so much, then actually there's still so much self-hatred there.
Oh, absolutely. Here's the thing. I always tell people you cannot die from a snake bite. Nobody's ever died from a snake bite. They say, what are you talking about? I said, well, the bite, you're bit by a snake, you're bit. That's it. You can't be unbitten. They said, well, people die from that. I said, no, they don't. They don't die from the bite. They die from the venom that continues to pour through you after the bite. So that's what kills people. It's the venom. So all you have to do is get rid of the venom. All you have to do is get rid of that which you are owning and carrying around with you, and you will be cured. And again, it comes back to the St. Francis prayer.
That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah. Where there is hatred, let me sow love.
Right. And I remember when before I stopped drinking and changed my life, I would be around dogs, and this was my love of my life. And dogs looked at me and didn't want me to pet them, which it sounds silly, but it had never happened. And kids, little children, you could tell they didn't want to look me in the eye. And I knew when that was happening, I knew that I was denying what was really happening inside of me, because that was not my natural state, was to be loved by little kids and by dogs. And
precisely.
And it reminds me of the St. Francis prayer that
if you ever think alcohol is good for you, just take some and pour it on your dog's dog food, and just see what they do. Take some scotch and just pour it on their dog food, and they'll look at you like, "Are you insane?"
And that was what I liked with scotch. But it's so amazing that the hatred of others really turns all into self-hatred and
precisely
lives.
And then you generate out a different kind of an energy.
Fear.
We all send out energy in our lives. They said of Jesus that when he would go into a village, just his presence in the village and nothing more would raise the consciousness of those around him. We all radiate out something called pheromones of energy. And if that energy is love, if that's what you're feeling inside, then you literally impact those people around you with that energy. If you're sending out fear, if you're sending out anxiety, you literally impact those around you. So you want to make sure that you don't allow your energy field to be contaminated, and you don't want to be contaminating the energy field of others as well. That's why when people quit drinking or quit doing drugs, they're always told, first and foremost, change the places that you go and the people that you hang out with.
Exactly.
Change that first. Change the environment, because you don't want to be radiating out or taking in that kind of energy.
And the friends and the mentors in my life, when I'm around them, I want to behave better. That's like you said, I want to raise my consciousness, and it's so important to keep yourself surrounded with that. And I'm always trying to do that better and better. Well, we only have a few minutes. Is there anything special you'd like to close with or to say?
Well, there's one essay in here that we haven't talked about. Again, these are all original essays that you can apply each and every day in your life. That was the purpose of writing this book. One was, probably the most profound and important one was from Patanjali, who I mentioned earlier, the author of the original Yoga Sutras. And he made a distinction between the world of form and the world of spirit. The word in spirit means inspire. The word in form, you get informed, all right? Information versus inspiration. He said, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new and great and wonderful world. And then he said these words, and I think we've been talking about this for this whole show. He said, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. Now think about dormant forces coming alive, forces, energy coming alive, and then you discover yourself to be a great, that's what inspiration is. So if you want to know how to get on the path of higher consciousness, move out of the world of form, become less informed, and become inspired. Because what we face today in our world and in our lives is not a deficit of information. We've got more information than we've ever had. We face a deficit of spirit. There's a spiritual deficit. And once you've replaced that deficit with love, with kindness, with peace, with self-acceptance, with high energy, then every problem that you face in the world will literally disappear before your eyes.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming on the show
today.
You're
welcome. Nice to be with you.
Bye-bye.
What a great smile.
You're so sweet. Bye-bye.
Bye.